A solitary flicker of candlelight, a muffled whisper from the attic, and then only silence. In 1868, deep within Holmes County, Ohio, the Caldwell farm stood as a testament to rigid faith and an unsettling quiet. Beneath its stoic facade, whispers of untold things began to stir, threatening to shatter a world built on devotion and denial. Before we descend into the heart of this mystery, tell us, from which corner of the world are you joining the host of silence today? Share your location in the comments. This is the story of the Caldwell family. The year 1868 had etched itself deeply into the very soil of Holmes County. Ohio, it was a land of relentless rolling hills, softened by the green velvet of summer and sharpened by the skeletal austerity of winter. Vast, undulating fields of corn, planted with disciplined precision, stretched to the distant, often hazy, horizon, giving the impression of an endless, ordered world. Here, the passage of time was marked not by clock towers, but by the rhythmic turning of seasons, the rise and fall of the sun, and the steady, unhurried pace of life dictated by the Amish community. Within this deeply traditional landscape, where every fence post and every furrowed row spoke of unwavering faith and hard-won labor, the Caldwell farm stood, a cluster of weathered wooden structures nestled just beyond a winding dirt track. The farmhouse, sturdy and unadorned, along with its towering, freshly painted red barn and several smaller outbuildings, bespoke a life stripped of all but the essential. Yet, even in this stark simplicity, an air of profound stillness clung to the property, a quietude that felt less like natural peace and more like a carefully constructed barrier, a deliberate hush. Ezekiel Caldwell, 44 years of age, was the undisputed patriarch. His presence within the homestead, a heavy, undeniable force. His frame was broad and unyielding, cloaked in the plain, dark garments that signified his station and his unwavering adherence to the faith. A thick, grizzled beard, already streaked with substantial threads of silver, descended almost to his waist, a testament to years of tradition meticulously upheld. His eyes, deep-set beneath heavy, almost perpetually furrowed brows, held a gaze that rarely softened. It was a look that seemed to measure, to assess, to command. And those who met it, whether among the close-knit Amish community or within the tight confines of his own home, often found their own gazes instinctively falling away, drawn to the patterns on the floorboards or the knotty grain of the table. When he moved, his steps were deliberate, heavy, each footfall seeming to press itself into the very earth, leaving an impression. During Sunday gatherings at the community's simple, unadorned meeting house, his voice, though never loud, carried an undeniable authority. His pronouncements on scripture and community matters were listened to with unblinking attention, his words resonating with the weight of tradition and a stern conviction. He was respected for his steadfastness, revered for his piety by his neighbors. Yet within the rough-hewn walls of his own property, that respect often curdled into something akin to dread. The farm dogs, usually boisterous, would flatten themselves to the ground as he passed, their tails still, their eyes tracking his movements with a quiet apprehension. The very air around Ezekiel seemed to thicken, demanding a silent deference from all living things that entered his sphere. Martha Caldwell, 38, moved through her days with the practiced, almost mechanical, grace of a shadow, a study in quiet, ceaseless efficiency. Her white coif, always immaculately starched and pinned, framed a face that appeared almost sculpted from stone, her lips perpetually set in a thin, straight line. Her hands, though calloused and roughened by years of unceasing labor-kneading dough for the family's daily bread, churning butter until her arms ached, scrubbing lye soap into wooden floors until they gleamed, mending garments with a needle that seemed to fly, executed every task with an almost ritualistic precision. There was no wasted motion, no lingering hesitation, no sigh of weariness that could be heard. She was, in the eyes of the community, the very embodiment of the devoted and obedient wife, her life a living testament to an unwavering faith and an absolute dedication to her role. The farmhouse, a meticulous testament to her ceaseless efforts, gleamed with an almost sterile cleanliness. The faint, comforting scent of beeswax and freshly baked bread often mingled with the persistent, sharp aroma of lye. Every wooden surface was polished to a dull sheen, every curtain hung without a wrinkle, Every pewter dish shone with a quiet luster from countless hours of scrubbing. Martha believed, with a quiet and formidable conviction, that her family walked faithfully in the paths of the Lord, and her home was a sacred, purified vessel for that belief. Her presence was woven into the very fabric of the house, a constant, silent hum of activity, an unseen, ever-present hand guiding the meticulous order of their days. She did not raise her voice. Her infrequent commands to her daughters were often conveyed through a subtle gesture, a pointed glance, or a sharp, almost imperceptible tilt of the head, understood immediately and obeyed without question. Their daughters, Anna, 19, and Rebecca, 17, were shaped by the same exacting molds as their parents. Yet faint traces of their youth still clung to them, delicate as the morning dew on the corn leaves. Anna, the elder, possessed a quiet solemnity that deeply mirrored her mother's. Her dark hair was always drawn back tightly from her face, secured beneath her own smaller, precisely pinned coif. Her eyes, the color of rich, dark earth, were often cast downwards, observing the ground before her as she walked, or fixed intently on the task at hand, never lingering on the faces of others. When she moved, her steps were soft, almost noiseless, a reflection of years spent learning to occupy space without drawing undue attention. She worked tirelessly alongside Martha, her hands deftly picking vegetables from the garden, her arms strong enough to carry heavy pails of water from the well, her fingers nimble as they mended worn garments by the flickering lamplight of the evenings. Her obedience was absolute, her dedication to her duties an extension of her very being, a silent testament to the teaching she had absorbed. Rebecca, the younger, was of a more delicate constitution. Her frame was slighter, her movements sometimes marked by an almost imperceptible tremor, particularly when her father's imposing shadow fell across a doorway. Her eyes, though also dark, seemed to hold a fleeting, distant quality, as if always contemplating something just beyond reach, a world that was not quite present. Her voice, when it was heard at all, was a soft murmur, barely audible, often trailing off as if the words themselves were too heavy a burden to carry, or as if she feared their sound. Both girls, raised under Ezekiel's unyielding hand, were paragons of submissiveness, their lives rigidly structured around obedience and diligent labor. They moved through the fields, husking corn in synchronized rows, their heads bent in unison, their bodies moving with an almost mechanical rhythm. They sat at the dining table, their backs straight against the hard wooden chairs, their hands folded neatly in their laps, awaiting their father's lengthy blessing before daring to touch their food. They were, in every observable aspect, model daughters, heirs to a demanding faith, their expressions often blank, giving little away of any inner life. The Caldwell farm, from the dusty lane that meandered to its gates, presented an image of rustic rectitude, a visual sermon on the virtues of hard work and devout living. The fields stretched out, a vibrant emerald in summer, transforming to a golden stubble in autumn, testifying to the honest toil of its inhabitants. The wind whispered ceaselessly through the towering cornstalks, a mournful, sibilant sound that often felt like the only voice in the vast, encompassing silence. In the mornings, the distant lowing of cattle from a faraway pasture, or the faint clatter of a neighbor's cart on the gravel road, were rare and fleeting breaks in the prevailing quiet. Within the farmhouse, the methodical tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the hall was the dominant rhythm, marking the steady, predictable passage of the hours with an almost solemn regularity. The kitchen, with its heavy iron stove and scrubbed wooden table, was meant to be the heart of the home, yet even there, an unusual stillness reigned. No boisterous laughter echoed from its whitewashed walls. No light-hearted chatter floated through the open windows on a warm afternoon. The only sounds were the purposeful ones of Martha's cooking, or the quiet rustle of the girls' dresses as they moved about their chores. A peculiar, almost palpable tension seemed woven into the very fabric of the Caldwell homestead. It was a silence that was not merely the absence of sound, but rather a tangible presence, heavy and charged, humming just beneath the surface of the meticulous order. When Ezekiel entered a room, a subtle, instantaneous shift occurred among the women. Martha would instinctively straighten her already rigid posture, her movements becoming even more precise, her head bowing almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging an unspoken command. The girls would freeze for a fraction of a second, their eyes dropping to their hands or to the floor, their hands momentarily stilling at their tasks, before resuming with a renewed, almost frantic diligence. At supper, the family sat around the sturdy oak table, bathed in the soft, flickering glow of a single oil lamp suspended above. Ezekiel would offer a lengthy blessing, his voice resonating with spiritual authority, his words filling the room with the gravity of Scripture. Then the meal would commence in near complete quietude, punctuated only by the faint scrape of cutlery against stoneware and the soft sounds of methodical chewing. No questions were asked, no stories shared, no casual remarks exchanged. Each person seemed encased in their own sphere of silence, their gazes often fixed on their plates, or on some indeterminate point beyond the window, avoiding all eye contact. This quietude extended beyond the walls of the house, permeating their interactions with the wider community. During the long, silent walks to the meeting house on Sundays, the Caldwells walked in a tight formation, Ezekiel leading, Martha a step behind, followed closely by Anna and Rebecca. Their steps were synchronized, their heads held straight, their eyes fixed forward on the path, never straying. No whispered conversations occurred between the sisters. No familiar glances were exchanged with other families they passed on the dusty lane. They moved as a single, disciplined unit, an embodiment of their rigid adherence to the path they had chosen. Or perhaps the path that had chosen them, setting them apart, even within their own close-knit community. The air around the farm, even on the sunniest, warmest days, seemed to hold a subtle chill, a quality of suppression that went beyond the natural breezes. It was a place where outward appearances of unwavering faith and strict discipline were meticulously maintained, creating a facade of purity that, to a keen observer, felt brittle, stretched thin over something far more complex and profoundly disquieting. The silence of the Caldwell farm, rather than being empty, was full of unspoken words, unshared thoughts, and a veiled tension that hummed just beneath the surface, waiting for any tremor to reveal the depths it concealed. It was a silence that promised to shatter. The quietude that settled over the Caldwell farm at the close of the day in Chapter 1 was not an empty silence, but a heavy, deliberate shroud, meticulously drawn tight over the festering secrets that corrupted the veneer of piety. It was a stillness that resonated with unspoken truths, a chilling premonition of decay beneath the pristine surface. For years, this profound quiet had served as the unwitting accomplice to a dark and unspeakable transgression, a cancerous growth consuming the very soul of the Caldwell household from within, beyond the meticulously scrubbed floors, the highly polished wooden furniture, and the rigidly upheld routines of daylight. Ezekiel Caldwell nurtured a profound shadow. This darkness mocked the sacred texts he so ardently preached and the spiritual leadership he projected to the community. With a chilling deliberation that defied the bounds of natural law, social custom, and even the strictures of their communal faith, he had taken his own daughters, Anna and Rebecca, as lovers. It was a monstrous pact, forged not with spoken words or written agreement, but in the oppressive silence of absolute obedience and fear, a sin whispered only in the deepest, most isolated hours of night. This unthinkable intimacy had endured, a corrosive agent eating away at the integrity of the family unit, transforming the hallowed space of their home, consecrated by Martha's devotion, into a hidden temple of profound DEFI, LAM-ENT as the sun. A brazen, watchful eye in the daytime sky would finally begin its slow descent below the rolling hills of Holmes County, painting the horizon in a final, fleeting blush of orange and purple. A different kind of vigil commenced. The sounds of the farm animals settling for the night, a distant cow's low, mournful moan, the rustle of a restless horse in the barn stall, the soft, repetitive cooing of pigeons nesting in the eaves, would gradually fade, receding into a pervasive hush. Inside the farmhouse, the oil lamps, their flames already trimmed low, were extinguished one by one, their warm glow surrendering to the encroaching shadows. The rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the main hall seemed to grow disproportionately louder, its steady, deliberate beat marking the slow, inexorable march of time toward the desolate pre-dawn hours. Martha Caldwell, her frame exhausted from her ceaseless daily labors, the endless rounds of cooking, cleaning, mending, and tending, would eventually succumb to a deep, untroubled sleep. Her breathing would become even, a soft, almost imperceptible rhythm emanating from her bedroom, its heavy wooden door always left slightly ajar. This subtle opening was a long-standing custom, allowing the fresh, cool night air to circulate through the otherwise stifling house. In that heavy, innocent sleep, she lay utterly oblivious, her peaceful state a stark and tragic contrast to the darkness that stirred and stretched just beyond the familiar walls of her room. The image of her unwavering devotion, the very essence of her existence, served as a fragile, unwitting shield for the depravity unfolding just feet away, though it was typically in the deep watches of the night, long after the last ember had cooled to ash in the kitchen hearth, and the moon had ascended to its silent zenith, casting a pale silver light through the upper windows, that Ezekiel would rise from his marital bed. His movements were practiced, quiet, almost preternaturally so, a spectral presence in the profound darkness. No floorboard creaked under his considerable weight that he did not anticipate. No latch clicked louder than a whisper. No loose object stirred from its resting place. A small brass lantern, its wick meticulously trimmed low, would be lit with a quick, practiced strike of a match. Its feeble, flickering flame cast dancing shadows across the whitewashed walls of the hallway, stretching his imposing figure into grotesque, elongated forms that seemed to writhe with a silent, unseen life, like the tormented souls of unconfessed sins. The air in the house, already cool with the night's descent, would grow subtly colder, an almost imperceptible chill that seemed to accompany his nocturnal passage. A prickle on the skin of an unseen observer. He would move through the narrow corridors, his bare feet making scarcely a sound against the aged wooden planks, each step placed with deliberate precision. The soft, tremulous glow of the lantern, an isolated beacon in the engulfing darkness, illuminated only the immediate path before him, leaving the rest of the house in an impenetrable, oppressive gloom. He would pass Martha's slightly open door, the faint, regular sound of her breathing providing an eerie, almost mocking counterpoint to his own deliberate, calculated silence. He would pause there for a fraction of a second, a barely perceptible hesitation in his measured stride, his shadow momentarily falling across the threshold of her innocent slumber, before continuing his slow, relentless journey, the lantern swinging with a barely audible whisper of brass against glass. His destination lay further down the hall, in the small, sparsely furnished bedrooms assigned to his daughters. First, he would approach Anna's room. The door, always carefully closed after nightfall, would not be locked. He would lift the iron latch with a careful, almost noiseless click, the faint sound barely disturbing the profound stillness that permeated the house. The lantern's light, a fleeting warmth, would diminish as he slipped inside, the door closing softly behind him, swallowing the pale glow into the deeper darkness of the room. For a prolonged, agonizing period, the hallway would remain in darkness, save for the faintest sliver of light that might escape from beneath the closed door, a mere thread against the overwhelming black, betraying the violation within. No sounds emerged from within, no cries, no whispered pleas, no sudden movements of distress. Only the enduring profound silence that seemed to have been perfected over years of repeated visits. A silence that had become a participant in the act itself, after a duration that stretched and twisted with the slow, internal turning of the night. The door to Anna's room would open once more, as quietly and deliberately as it had closed. Ezekiel would emerge, his face illuminated by the relit lantern, his expression as unreadable and impassive as the shadowed walls around him. His footsteps, still measured and silent, would then carry him further down the hall towards Rebecca's room. The same ritual, meticulously repeated, would unfold, the careful lift of the latch, the diminishing light as he slipped inside, the long, suffocating silence that followed his entry. And again, no sounds of protest, no visible disturbance to betray the nature of his visit. The house would continue its silent vigil, a tomb of complicity, as the patriarch moved between his daughters' rooms. Night after night, week after week, season after season, the repetition itself, a horrifying testament to the depth of the transgression, the complexity of the sisters apparent, Acceptance was a chilling testament to the corrosive power of their environment and their blind devotion to their father. It was not an approval born of desire or mutual consent, but of a twisted, deeply ingrained obedience that had systematically warped their understanding of right and wrong, of self and sin. From the external observer's perspective, Anna and Rebecca displayed no outward signs of resistance. During the day, they continued their demanding duties with the same solemn diligence, their faces often devoid of any betraying expression, their eyes perpetually downcast, avoiding direct gaze. Their movements remained as precise, their silence as profound as ever. If anything, their devotion to Ezekiel seemed to deepen, manifesting as an intensified adherence to his every command, an almost unnerving anticipation of his needs. They would attend to him at meals with an eagerness that bordered on reverence, their hands hovering, anticipating his slightest gesture, serving his portion first, their backs ramrod straight. This profound, silent acceptance was observable in their interactions with Ezekiel, when he would briefly lay a heavy hand on Anna's shoulder as she passed him in the kitchen, or offer Rebecca a shared, charged glance across the dining table that no one else seemed to notice. There was no recoil, no visible flinch from the girls. Instead, their postures might subtly straighten, a faint, almost imperceptible tension replacing the usual submissiveness. It was a silence they shared, an unholy bond forged in the darkness, understood without words, communicated through barely perceptible shifts in bearing. They functioned as a seamless unit, each sister bound not only to their father, but also perhaps to each other, by the crushing weight of their shared, unspeakable secret. The lack of visible struggle, the chilling absence of an outcry, the continuation of their daily routines with an almost unnatural serenity, all painted a picture of a profound internal acquiescence. This capitulation was born from years of relentless indoctrination, an unquestioning acceptance of authority, and a devotion so absolute it had become self-destructive, consuming their individual will. For years, this perverse ritual had persisted, a silent cancer within the very core of the family. The Caldwell farm, externally a beacon of devout Amish life, had become a mausoleum for a hidden, monstrous truth. The meticulously maintained veneer of discipline, the unwavering faith publicly displayed, the unblemished reputation carefully cultivated all were precise components of a monstrous hypocrisy. The very air within the farmhouse, once scented with beeswax and piety, now carried a subtle, unseen taint, a lingering chill that defied the warmth of the hearth, a faint, inexplicable dampness on the wooden surfaces. The shadows that danced from Ezekiel's lantern in the dead of night were not merely visual phenomena. They were physical manifestations of the corrupting secret, twining themselves around the pillars of the house, clinging to the rough-hewn wooden beams, seeping into the very foundations of the Caldwell name. It was a dark, unspoken history that had quietly festered, year after year, transforming a home meant for the Lord into a chamber of unspeakable sin, hidden under the unyielding veil of silence and unwavering pretense, waiting for the slightest crack to expose its putrid core. The quietude that had settled over the Caldwell farm, a profound and pervasive hush detailed in the preceding chapter, was not an empty silence. Instead, it was a heavy, deliberate shroud, meticulously drawn tight over the festering secrets that corrupted the immaculate veneer of piety. This stillness, honed by years of practice, vibrated with unspoken truths, a chilling premonition of decay, actively at work beneath the pristine surface. For years, this profound quiet had served as the unwitting accomplice to a dark and unspeakable transgression, a cancerous growth consuming the very soul of the Caldwell household from within. Unbeknownst to its most diligent inhabitant, the morning arrived on a cold autumn dawn, the kind that steals the last vestiges of warmth from the earth, leaving a biting chill in the air that crept through the cracks in the wooden walls. Outside, the world was still cloaked in a deep pre-dawn blue, the distant cornfields shivering under a thin layer of hoarfrost. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, crisp and sharp, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves. Inside the farmhouse, the pervasive silence was broken only by the methodical tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the main hall, its pendulum swinging with an unwavering rhythm. Martha Caldwell, now 44, stirred from her deep, exhausted sleep. The light filtering through the small, uncurtained window of her bedroom was barely a suggestion of the impending day. A ghostly pale gray, it hinted at the frigid temperatures outside. Her waking was a matter of ingrained habit, a silent, almost automatic process honed over decades of rural life. Her feet, calloused and familiar with the cold wooden floors, found their way to the simple homespun rug beside her bed. She dressed quickly, efficiently. In the dark, her movements economical, betraying no sign of lingering slumber. The starched white coif, always placed within reach, was pinned into place with practiced ease, framing a face still softened by sleep, yet already settling into its familiar, unyielding lines. Her first duty of the day, as it had been for years, was to descend to the kitchen and rekindle the fire in the large iron stove. The warmth it provided was the literal heart of the home, chasing away the pervasive chill and preparing for the day's early meal. She navigated the familiar layout of her bedroom and the narrow hallway in absolute darkness, her hands instinctively reaching for the small brass tinderbox on the mantelpiece above the cold hearth. The faint scratch of the flint against steel, followed by the immediate, quick spark, was a sound she knew intimately. The tinder caught, a tiny flame blossoming in the vast darkness of the kitchen, casting dancing, ephemeral shadows across the rough-hewn beams of the ceiling and the whitewashed walls. As she knelt before the stove, carefully feeding kindling into the nascent flame, a sound reached her ears. It was faint at first, barely a disturbance against the rhythmic tick of the clock and the growing crackle of the fire. A subtle shift in the house's accustomed silence, muffled, indistinct, not the familiar groaning of old wood settling or the rustle of a mouse in the pantry. This sound had a different quality. It was a rhythmic, shuffling movement, footsteps, and then a low, barely audible murmur, whispers. The sound seemed to emanate from above, specifically from the attic. The attic was a space rarely used, a repository for forgotten heirlooms, dried herbs, and stored linens, accessible only by a steep, pull-down ladder in the main hall. Its silence was usually absolute, a dead space above the living quarters. Martha paused, her hand hovering over a piece of kindling, the tiny flame reflecting in her still eyes. She straightened slowly, her back making a soft creak that was loud in the sudden absence of her prior movements. She tilted her head slightly, her hearing keen, straining to discern the source of the anomaly. The footsteps were faint, almost dragged, and the whispers were like the indistinct buzzing of insects, just beyond comprehension, yet undeniably present. The sounds were not consistent with a mouse or the wind. They were too deliberate, too human. A growing apprehension, cold and unwelcome, began to twine itself around her, a sensation alien to her usual placid composure. This was a deviation, an unexpected break in the meticulously ordered routine of her life and home. She retrieved a small beeswax candle from a shelf above the stove, lighting its wick from the fire now taking hold. The flame, though small, felt like a vital, fragile beacon in the lingering gloom of the house. Its light, flickering and uncertain, cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch and recoil with every subtle movement of air. Clutching the candle, its fragile flame her only guide, Martha moved from the kitchen towards the main hall. Each step was taken with deliberate care, her bare feet silent on the cold floorboards. The air in the hallway felt even colder, a noticeable chill that seemed to even emanate from above. The muffled sounds from the attic grew marginally clearer as she approached the pull-down ladder. The faint shuffling, the low murmurs, they were indeed human, though still unidentifiable, like voices heard through a thick blanket. She reached the ladder, its wooden slats disappearing into the dark maw of the attic opening. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled almost imperceptibly as she reached up, grasped the metal ring, and pulled the heavy wooden structure down with a soft thud against the floor. Dust, disturbed by the movement, drifted silently in the candle's weak beam, glittering like tiny, ephemeral stars. The ladder creaked under her weight as she began her slow, deliberate ascent. Each step was measured, cautious, her gaze fixed on the flickering flame, which seemed to dance more wildly with every inch she gained. The air in the attic was heavy, stale, carrying the faint, dry scent of old wood, dust, and something else, something indefinable. A subtle cloying odor that felt out of place with each upward step. The muffled sounds became marginally more distinct. The whispers were now a low, continuous drone, still devoid of discernible words, but unmistakably human. The shuffling movements suggested bodies shifting, fabric rustling. A wave of ice seemed to wash over Martha, despite the physical exertion of the climb. Her posture, usually so erect, became rigid, almost brittle. Her grip on the candle tightened, her knuckles showing white against her worn skin. Her breathing, usually shallow and even, became almost imperceptible, a conscious effort not to draw attention to her presence. Finally, her head cleared the attic floorboards. The small space was cloaked in a semi-darkness, pierced only by the weak light of her candle and a thin, grayish glow from a single dusty window near the eaves. The air was colder here, much colder than the rest of the house. And there, in the corner, illuminated by the struggling light, was a scene that etched itself into her vision with the cold, precise clarity of a winter's morning. Ezekiel Caldwell lay on a makeshift bed of old quilts and stored blankets. His large frame sprawled. Beside him, almost intertwined, lay Anna, her dark hair fanned out against a coarse woolen blanket. Their bodies were partially covered, their movements still, but their proximity, the intimacy of their position, was stark and undeniable. Ezekiel's eyes, usually so severe, were closed in a deep, placid sleep, his heavy features relaxed. Anna's face was turned slightly away, partially obscured by the shadows, but the outline of her body against her father's was a testament to their shared space, their illicit connection. The faint whispers, the shuffling sounds, were now comprehensible, the soft, post-sleep murmurs of two people who had shared a bed, settling back into individual consciousness. A quiet intimacy that had no place between father and daughter. The revelation struck Martha with the force of a cold blade, plunging through her chest, deeper than any physical pain could reach. It was an impact that stole her breath, yet produced no sound. Her entire body stiffened, becoming utterly rigid, as if suddenly turned to ice. The candle in her hand, usually held with such steady resolve, trembled violently, its flame flickering, threatening to extinguish. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on the tableau, absorbing every devastating detail with an almost clinical precision. There were no tears that welled, no gasps that escaped her lips. Her mouth remained closed, a tight, unmoving line. A profound, absolute silence descended upon her, not just the absence of sound in the attic, but a complete cessation of any outward reaction. Her features, which normally maintained a stoic calm, now became utterly devoid of expression, a mask of uncomprehending blankness. It was a silence that did not merely settle around her, but seemed to burrow deep within her, replacing the beating of her heart with a hollow void, burying it under an avalanche of unspeakable betrayal. The discovery was not merely a moment of shock. It was the precise point of an irreversible fracture. The world Martha had known, built on the unwavering pillars of faith, family, and discipline, shattered into a million unseen shards. She stood there, frozen, the flickering candlelight casting monstrous shadows, until, with a movement as slow and deliberate as the turning of the earth, she turned her back to the scene. Her departure from the attic was as silent as her ascent. She did not close the door behind her, leaving the scene exposed, a wound in the fabric of the house. Her descent down the creaking ladder was almost imperceptible, her feet finding each rung with an unnatural grace, born of mechanical detachment. The candle, still clutched in her trembling hand, continued its weak, unsteady glow, illuminating nothing but the profound, unbreachable silence that had now fully enveloped Martha Caldwell. Her heart, once a vessel of devotion, was now a tomb, silent and cold. The transformation had begun. The profound, unbreachable silence that had enveloped Martha Caldwell in the attic, marking the irreversible fracture within her, did not dissipate with the dawn. Instead, it deepened, transforming her customary quietude into an unsettling, almost chilling calm. In the days and weeks that followed her discovery, a palpable shift occurred within the Caldwell household. The crisp, cold air of autumn, now firmly entrenched in Holmes County, seemed to mirror the internal landscape of Martha. The cornfields, once verdant and teeming with life, had withered to brittle stalks, rustling with a dry, mournful whisper in the November wind, a sound that carried a cold, relentless quality. Martha continued her daily routines with an almost supernatural precision, each movement a testament to a newfound mechanical efficiency. Her steps, already silent, became even more deliberate, entirely devoid of the subtle give that hinted at human weariness. Her hands, perpetually busy, carried out their tasks baking bread, churning butter, mending clothes, scrubbing floors, with a meticulousness that bordered on obsessive. No speck of dust dared to settle. No crease remained in the pressed linen. The farmhouse, already pristine, took on an almost sterile sheen, reflecting the cold, hard clarity that had replaced Martha's former devotion. Yet this intensified diligence was not born of renewed piety. It was the outward manifestation of a profound internal withdrawal, a deeper submission that concealed a growing resentment. Cold and sharp as the bitter winds that now scoured the Ohio landscape, her interactions with Ezekiel and her daughters, Anna and Rebecca, changed in subtle yet profound ways. She met Ezekiel's gaze even less frequently than before, her eyes often fixed on some distant point beyond the windows, or intensely focused on the task at hand. When he issued a command, her response was immediate, unhesitating, her head bowing slightly, a gesture of deference that now seemed imbued with a chilling mockery. She moved around him, attending to his needs with a quiet, unsettling eagerness, anticipating his unspoken wishes with an almost uncanny intuition. There was no visible flinch, no tremor in her hands when she served him his meal, no deviation from her submissive posture. Instead, a peculiar rigidity permeated her frame, an unyielding stillness that suggested an inner core of ice towards Anna and Rebecca. Her demeanor also shifted. The few, muted expressions of maternal concern or gentle guidance that had occasionally softened her, features in the past, were now entirely absent. Her gaze, when it passed over them, was devoid of warmth, a cool, appraising look that seemed to categorize them as mere extensions of the household's routine, objects to be managed. She would instruct them in their chores with fewer words, her voice flat, devoid of its former, albeit subtle, inflections. The daughters, in turn, seemed to shrink further under her altered gaze, their own movements becoming even more subdued, their silence deepening in response to hers. The already heavy quiet of the Caldwell home grew heavier still, punctuated only by the purposeful sounds of labor. Over these weeks, Martha began the meticulous process of her vengeance. It was an undertaking orchestrated, thread by thread, gesture by gesture, with the painstaking precision of someone weaving a complex quilt. Her actions were discreet, deliberate, designed to blend seamlessly with their established routines, raising no alarm. She began to spend more time than usual away from the immediate vicinity of the house, ostensibly gathering wild herbs for remedies, a common practice among Amish women. Her basket, typically filled with chamomile or mint, now harbored darker specimens. She would wander deep into the autumn-tinged woods that bordered their property, her white coif a stark, almost spectral beacon against the muted browns and grays of the trees. Her hands, usually adept at discerning edible from inedible, now sought out specific plants, their leaves or berries known for their hidden, poisonous properties. She moved with an uncharacteristic stealth, her footsteps rustling through the fallen leaves with a deliberate softness, her gaze sweeping the forest floor with an intense, focused intent. She gathered various types, each carefully chosen, each destined for a specific purpose. There were berries of the deadly nightshade, their glossy black surface belying their toxic core, which she crushed between smooth river stones, yielding a dark, viscous paste. There were the insidious leaves of water hemlock, which she meticulously dried and ground into a fine pale green powder, its potent venom requiring only a small dose. And there were the roots of foxglove, carefully unearthed, cleaned, and then painstakingly pulverized, their properties known to affect the very beating of the heart. These were not the common medicinal herbs of their pantry. These were agents of slow, agonizing demise, carefully stockpiled back in the quiet solitude of the farmhouse. Away from the prying eyes of her daughters and the authoritative presence of Ezekiel, Martha performed her preparations. She used the small, unused grinding stones kept in the back of the pantry carefully washing them afterwards. She did not work in the kitchen, where her activities might be observed, but in the dimly lit root cellar, accessible by a heavy trapdoor beneath the pantry floor. The air there was cool and damp, filled with the earthy scent of potatoes and carrots, a stark contrast to the sterile dryness above. There, by the flickering light of a single tallow candle, she would crush and grind the gathered herbs into fine powders, separating them into small, carefully wrapped bundles of linen. Her movements were methodical, almost surgical, her face a mask of detached concentration. No emotion flickered across her features. No tremor betrayed the sinister nature of her task. Each bundle was stored in a small, unmarked wooden box, hidden deep within a flour bin, indistinguishable from the other innocuous foodstuffs. The perfect occasion for her plan presented itself with the arrival of Ezekiel's birthday. It was a day that, in their austere community, was acknowledged with quiet reverence rather than boisterous celebration. Martha announced her intention to prepare a special supper, a seemingly normal and abundant feast that would honor the patriarch. This decision, though not unusual for a birthday, carried a hidden, sinister purpose. The daughters assisted, as always, their quiet movements reflecting the solemnity of the occasion. Rebecca helped Martha retrieve the best cuts of roasted venison from the smokehouse, while Anna assisted in kneading the dough for the fresh bread. Ezekiel, unaware of the transformation that had occurred within his wife, accepted her efforts with his usual stern, satisfied nod, seeing only the reflection of his authority and Martha's obedience. The day of the birthday arrived, a cold, gray day characteristic of late November. The sky hung low, a heavy blanket of charcoal, promising snow. The air was sharp, biting, and a biting wind rattled the windows of the farmhouse. Inside, the kitchen became a silent hive of activity under Martha's direction. The scent of roasted meat and baking bread began to fill the usually sparse air, a rich, inviting aroma that mingled with the dry, autumnal scent of the house. Martha moved with an almost frenetic energy, her hands never still. She baked several loaves of fresh, crusty bread, their golden brown tops gleaming from egg wash. A large haunch of venison, perfectly seasoned and slow roasted, its juices glistening, was carefully carved and arranged on a heavy wooden platter. Vegetables from the garden, carrots, potatoes, and parsnips were roasted until tender and sweet, their earthy aromas blending with the richer scents of the meat. A large pitcher of fresh, unpasteurized milk, sweetened with a generous dollop of homemade honey, was placed at the center of the table, but the centerpiece of her scheme, the vessel for her cold vengeance, was the cider. It was a local, homemade brew, potent and slightly tart, served traditionally on special occasions. Martha had prepared a large wooden chalice for Ezekiel, a heavy, carved piece that had been his for years. As the dinner preparations neared their completion, and the daughters were occupied setting the polished pewter plates and simple wooden mugs around the long oak table, Martha retreated briefly to the pantry. Her movements were swift, calculated. She reached into the flour bin, her hand unerringly finding the hidden wooden box. From it, she extracted the small, carefully wrapped linen bundle containing the finely ground poisonous herbs. Back in the kitchen, her back turned discreetly to the bustling, yet silent activity of Anna and Rebecca in the dining room, Martha performed the crucial act. She poured a generous measure of cider into Ezekiel's wooden chalice, its deep amber liquid swirling. Then, with a hand that remained perfectly steady, she untied the linen bundle. The fine, pale green powder, almost imperceptible, drifted into the chalice, dissolving silently into the sweet, fragrant liquid with barely a ripple. She stirred it once, slowly, with a small wooden spoon, ensuring its complete incorporation, watching as the powder vanished without a trace, leaving the cider looking exactly as it should. The act was performed without a flicker of emotion on her face, no hesitation, no visible sign of the profound, sinister purpose behind her meticulous actions. She then poured the remaining cider into the large pitcher for the rest of the family, her movements unhurried, natural. The poisoned chalice, now indistinguishable from any other, was placed at Ezekiel's customary head of the table. The feast was complete, an abundant and seemingly normal spread, a testament to Martha's relentless domesticity. But beneath the facade of familial warmth, and celebratory dishes lay a cold, calculated intention. The poisoned banquet, prepared thread by thread, gesture by gesture, now awaited its unsuspecting consumers, poised to seal the fate of her family, all under the chilling, unwavering gaze of a woman whose heart had been entombed by a silence colder than any November wind. The table, laden with the fruits of her labor, shimmered in the lamplight, a silent altar for the vengeance now ready to be unleashed. The profound, unbreachable silence that had enveloped Martha Caldwell after her discovery in the attic, marking an irreversible fracture within her, deepened into an unsettling, chilling calm. This internal shift, detailed in the preceding chapter, was now poised for its grim unveiling on Ezekiel's birthday night. The evening descended upon the Caldwell farm, a heavy, velvet cloak of late November. The sky hung a uniform charcoal gray, promising snow, and the air carried a biting, damp chill. Inside the farmhouse, a single oil lamp above the oak dining table cast a warm but confined glow, pushing shadows into the room's periphery. The table, usually sparse, now boasted an unusual abundance. Martha's fresh, crusty bread, a large platter of roasted venison, bowls piled high with roasted root vegetables, and a pitcher of honey-sweetened milk. At Ezekiel's customary place sat his heavy, carved wooden chalice, now filled with amber cider. The family gathered with their usual solemnity. Ezekiel, stern and authoritative, took his seat at the head, his gaze surveying the generous spread without a hint of suspicion. Martha sat opposite, her back ramrod straight, her white coif pristine. Her face remained a mask of profound calm, her eyes fixed on the tabletop, revealing nothing of her cold, intricate vengeance. Anna and Rebecca, seated on either side, were unusually subdued, their movements quieter, their eyes rarely lifting. The perpetual silence of Caldwell meals was thicker tonight, charged with an unseen tension. Ezekiel, in his role as patriarch, began the customary blessing. His deep voice, resonant with scripture, filled the lamplit room, speaking of gratitude and faith. He concluded his prayer with a booming amen, then reached for his chalice, raising it to his lips. He took a long, deliberate swallow of the cider, his gaze briefly meeting Martha's across the table. Her eyes held his for a moment, unblinking, before returning to her plate. Oblivious to the sinister purpose of the ordinary-looking drink, Ezekiel took another, larger draught, setting the chalice down with a satisfied sigh. The meal proceeded quietly. The clinking of pewter, the gentle scrape of knives were the only sounds beyond methodical chewing. Ezekiel ate heartily, consuming venison and bread. Martha, meanwhile, ate sparingly, her movements precise, almost ritualistic. The daughters picked at their plates, their glances occasionally flickering to their father, then quickly away. Soon, the first subtle signs of the poison's insidious work began. Ezekiel, reaching for his chalice a third time, paused. His hand, usually strong, exhibited a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. He lifted the heavy mug with a slight stiffness, requiring more effort. After he drank, a subtle pallor spread across his face, a grayish tinge beneath his weathered skin. He shifted in his seat, a slow, deliberate movement suggesting discomfort. His eyes, previously sharp, seemed to lose their keenness, a slight haziness clouding their depth. He attempted to cut more venison, but his arms stiffened further, his movements less coordinated. The knife clattered softly against the platter, loud in the quiet room. He frowned, a deep furrow forming between his brows, and passed a hand across his forehead, a rare gesture of unease. His breathing, previously deep and even, became shallower, marked by an occasional, soft rasp. He tried to speak, but only a low, indistinct murmur escaped his lips, swallowed by the oppressive silence. He slumped slightly, his imposing posture yielding to an unseen force. His heavy beard rested more heavily on his chest, and his large hands, usually firm, gripped the table edges with a visible tremble, knuckles white. Anna and Rebecca exchanged a fleeting, nervous glance, their hands pausing, but neither spoke. Martha, watching her husband's slow decline, remained perfectly still, her eyes fixed on him with unwavering detachment, when Ezekiel's arms seemed too stiff to hold the chalice. His head listing, Martha slowly rose. The scraping of her wooden chair was the first sharp, intentional sound in hours. Her movement was deliberate, her posture, usually bowed, now tall, erect, unyielding. For the first time, her voice, usually a muted whisper, rose above a murmur, strong, clear, and resonant with an unprecedented edge. She spoke of Ezekiel as a sinner, her voice echoing. She accused her daughters, Anna and Rebecca, of being accomplices, crying out that they had transformed their sacred dwelling into a temple of Imundity. Her head was held high, her eyes wide, gleaming with fierce, almost delirious religious fervor. With a swiftness that belied her years, she snatched a large, sharp kitchen knife from the table, its blade glinting. Her movements, once controlled, were now imbued with furious strength. A muffled cry, choked off, escaped Ezekiel as she lunged. The lamplight, disturbed, flickered wildly, casting grotesque, dancing shadows across the whitewashed walls. A sickening thud was heard as Ezekiel's heavy frame slumped further, his head striking the table. The white tablecloth bloomed with crimson, mingling with spilled cider. Anna and Rebecca, frozen in terror, their faces pale, watched in horrified silence. Their cries were trapped, strangled by fear. Martha, consumed by a purifying frenzy, turned from Ezekiel. Her wide, unseeing eyes swept over her daughters. Her arm, wielding the glinting knife, moved with horrifying speed. A desperate, guttural sound from Anna, then a sharp shriek from Rebecca, were cut short as Martha brought the blade down repeatedly. Muffled thuds and choked gasps filled the dining room, now a horrifying tableau of violence. The lamplight continued its frantic dance, painting the scene in stark contrasts of light and shadow, transforming the family table into an altar of blood and terror. The screams, the guttural sounds, the wet, sickening impacts soon mingled with a profound, heavier silence. The following morning, a cold gray dawn broke. Neighbors noticed the unusual quiet at the Caldwell homestead. No smoke from the chimney, no sounds of chores. After some time, a small group of men, led by Jacob Miller, approached. The door, surprisingly unlocked, revealed the gruesome scene within. The dining room was a place of unspeakable horror. Overturned chairs, a table scarred and drenched in crimson, the sweet scent of cider mingling with blood. Seated on the blood-soaked floor, amidst the wreckage, was Martha Caldwell. Her white coif askew, her dress stiff with dried blood. Her hands were caked in it. Her eyes, however, held a distant, lost gaze. She was not crying, nor screaming. Instead, her voice, soft and steady, recited passages from the Bible, fragments echoing in the silent, gruesome room. Neighbors reported hearing her repeat phrases like, "I have purified the house of the Lord, ... Martha Caldwell was brought to trial in Millersburg weeks later. The court, filled with stunned faces, heard the accounts. Martha remained largely silent, her expression unreadable. She was swiftly judged and condemned to life imprisonment. To her last days, confined within prison walls, Martha was often observed repeating, "I purified them. I freed them." The story did not end with Martha's sentence. The Caldwell farm was abandoned, slowly succumbing to the elements. Fields grew wild, barn roofs sagged, windows shattered. With the dilapidation came rumors, whispered first around hearths, then openly discussed. Farmers claimed to hear wagons creaking at night, followed by the mournful cries of young girls calling for their father, carried on the autumn wind. Travelers swore they saw the ghostly figure of a woman in a white coif, walking silently between the overgrown corn stalks, a glint of rust-stained metal in her hand. Local residents even today avoid those lands after sunset, certain that the curse of the Caldwells still breathes beneath the rotting wood, a perpetual haunting woven into Holmes County folklore. The events of that cold November night became a chilling testament to the darkness, festering beneath a facade of piety, leaving behind a legacy not of faith, but of terror and an enduring spectral presence. The silence of Holmes County, once a testament to unwavering faith, ultimately yielded to the echoing screams within the Caldwell farmhouse. A home built on piety was shattered by a father's unseen transgression, a mother's cold vengeance, and the terrible, cleansing fire of a faith betrayed. Martha Caldwell, once a figure of stoic obedience, became an instrument of brutal purification leaving a trail of blood on a white tablecloth, reciting scripture amidst the carnage, and ultimately sealing her family's fate in both life and legend. The walls of stone held her until her last breath. Her fervent whispers of release and purification lingered, carried on the very winds that now sweep through the abandoned homestead. The Caldwell farm now stands as a stark monument, a decaying silhouette against the Ohio sky, a place with a veil between what was and what remains thin and permeable. It serves as a chilling testament to the unseen evils that can fester beneath the most righteous of facades, and to the profound, destructive power of a heart pushed beyond its breaking point. Perhaps it is not the spirits of the dead that truly haunt these desolate fields, but the enduring echo of a truth too terrible to speak, a truth that transformed devotion into madness, and a family's legacy into a curse whispered in the dark. What shadows, if any, do you believe still cling to the Caldwell farm? And what do their lingering cries truly signify? Share your thoughts below. And if the whispers of the past hold you captive, consider subscribing to the Host of Silence and mark your approval, for in these tales, the past never truly dies.